Topher Grace's portrayal of Eddie Brock in Venom in Spider-Man 3 has been a topic of debate among fans for nearly 2 decades. Critics often argue that this version of Venom feels rushed, underdeveloped, and far removed from his comic book roots. Some critics point to Grace's smaller, physical appearance, others to the limited screen time he received, and many blame the studio's insistence on including Venom against director Sam Raimi's original vision. For many fans, this Venom didn't live up to the imposing, hulking anti-hero they grew up with in the comics. But what if we've been looking at this all wrong? Yes, this Venom is different, leaner, more human, and less physically intimidating than his comic counterpart. But dismissing his betrayal outright overlooks the brilliance of what Sam Raimi and Topher Grace achieved. This Eddie Brock isn't just a villain, he's a dark reflection of Peter Parker, a cautionary tale about revenge, ego, and self-destruction. The symbiote doesn't just give them power, it amplifies their insecurities and negative emotions until they become consumed by it. When Topher Grace was announced as Eddie Brock Venom in Spider-Man 3, the casting decision immediately sparked controversy among fans. Many felt he was an odd choice for the role, especially compared to the comic book version of Eddie Brock, who is traditionally depicted as a physically imposing, muscular figure, a sharp contrast to Grace's lean build and boyish appearance. Fans had grown accustomed to seeing Eddie as a hulking brute whose sheer physicality matches the monstrous nature of Venom, and Grace's smaller appearance didn't align with those expectations. Additionally, Grace is best known at the time for his role as Eric Foreman in the sitcom That 70s Show, where he played a sarcastic, awkward everyman.
What are you doing eating?
Well, it's mainly for survival.
This comedic and somewhat nerdy persona clashed with the image of Eddie Brock as a menacing, intimidating rival to Spider-Man. Critics also argued that Grace's portrayal lacked the gravitas and intensity needed to bring such an iconic villain to life, especially when compared to Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin or Alfred Molina's Doc Ock from the earlier films in the Sam Raimi's trilogy. Many felt that Grace's Eddie Brock came across as too whiny, petulant, rather than a formidable foe, which further fueled the perception that he was a miscast. While it's easy to see why fans initially didn't like Topher Grace's casting, dismissing him as a miscast overlooks the unique strengths he brought to the role and to the context of the film. Raimi's Eddie was designed to be a darker reflection of Peter Parker, someone who shared Peter's ambition and intelligence but lacked his moral compass. In this sense, Grace was an inspired choice. His lean frame and youthful appearance mirrored Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker, emphasizing their similarities while highlighting their key differences in the characters. Raimi clearly prioritized thematic resonance over comic accuracy, and Grace delivered exactly what he required for this interpretation of Eddie Brock. Furthermore, despite limited screen time and a script that didn't fully flesh out his character, Grace gave a committed performance. He captured Eddie's bitterness and jealousy with subtlety in earlier scenes and fully embraced Venom's unhinged aggression once bonded with the symbiote. It's worth noting that Grace himself has expressed admiration for Venom as a character and took the role seriously despite knowing how beloved and scrutinized the character would be. While Topher Grace may not fit the traditional mold of Eddie Brock from the comics, his performance worked within the context of Raimi's trilogy, offering a grounded take on Venom that aligned with the film's themes of revenge and moral corruption. For all its flaws, Spider-Man 3 gave us a Venom who wasn't just a physical threat, but an emotional one. A testament to Topher Grace's ability to bring nuance to an iconic character, despite working within the constraints of an overstuffed film. Overall, Topher Grace wasn't miscast as Eddie Brock, he was simply misunderstood. His portrayal laid into the thematic core of Spider-Man 3. His performance captured the emotional and psychological menace of Venom, emphasizing his human flaws rather than just his physical power. Grace delivered a grounded and unsettling take that fits Sam Raimi's vision for the trilogy. In hindsight, his Venom is less about spectacle and more about character, a choice that deserves more appreciation. And speaking of Venom, let's talk about his design. This version of Venom leans into more horror-inspired grotesqueness, creating a creature-like appearance that emphasizes Eddie Brock's moral and psychological decay. This design serves as a visual metaphor for Eddie's transformation from a flawed man into a literal monster. Topher Grace's Venom feels like something out of a Sam Raimi horror film, fitting given Raimi's roots in the genre. The teeth aren't just weapons, they symbolize unchecked aggression, while the soulless eyes reflect Eddie's loss of empathy. The design mirrors Eddie's internal collapse. His Venom isn't a hulking powerhouse, but instead emphasizing that Eddie isn't a born monster, but a man consumed by his own worst traits. The symbiote clings to him like a parasite, with tendrils and veins pulsating across his body, visually reinforcing the idea that Eddie is being eaten by his own hatred. Venom's sleek black design and elongated limbs directly contrast Spider-Man's vibrant red and blue suit and heroic silhouette. This is not just a villain, it's a corrupted reflection of Spider-Man. The absence of a traditional spider emblem on the Venom chest, replaced by a skeletal, organic pattern, which underscores Eddie's rejection of responsibility and heroism. Grace's lean physique makes Venom seem unsubtle and unpredictable. This version twitches, snarls, and moves with erratic and animalistic energy. The design highlights vulnerability beneath the menace, reminding viewers that Eddie isn't in control. The design ties into the film's exploration of ego and corruption. Venom's grotesque appearance mirrors Eddie's moral rot. His elongated tongue, jagged claws, and exposed teeth aren't just scary. They are physical manifestations of Eddie's bitterness and spite. This Venom isn't a cool anti-hero. He's a cautionary symbol of what happens when someone surrenders entirely to their worst impulses, where the design succeeds. The design prioritizes unease over epicness, making Venom feel like a nightmare brought to life. It visually connects to Eddie's arc. His physical transformation mirrors his ethical unraveling. By avoiding comic accuracy, the design stands apart as a distinct, thematically rich interpretation. In short, Grace's Venom design works because it isn't just about looking intimidating, it's about embodying Eddie Brock's downfall. The creature-like aesthetic makes Venom feel less like a supervillain and more like a tragic monster, which aligns perfectly with the film's focus on human frailty and the corrupting nature of revenge. Eddie Brock's shortcomings in Spider-Man 3 are rooted in his inability to accept responsibility for his actions, his delusional nature, and his tendency to scapegoat others for his failures. These flaws not only make sense within the context of the film, but they also reflect real-life scenarios where personal failings lead to destructive behavior. There are 4 factors about Eddie that can be found in the film. In real life, people often struggle to admit their mistakes, especially when their ego or livelihood is at stake. For example, professionals caught in scandals may deflect blame onto colleagues or external circumstances rather than taking responsibility. This behavior stems from a fear of failure and unwillingness to confront personal flaws. This factor parallels to Eddie because in the movie, Eddie tries to fake a photo of Spider-Man to further advance his career, only for Peter to expose him and get him fired. Instead of owning up to his mistake, Eddie blames Peter for ruining his life and his career. This refusal to take accountability is central to Eddie's downfall. Factor 2. Scapegoating. Scapegoating is a common psychological defense mechanism where individuals project their failures onto others. For instance, someone who loses their job might blame office politics or a specific coworker rather than reflecting on their own performance. This factor also parallels to Eddie because Eddie prays for Peter's death and later blames Peter for stealing Gwen Stacy from him, despite their relationship being minimal. This irrational fixation on Peter as a source of all of his problems highlights Eddie's need to scapegoat someone else for his misfortunes. Factor 3. Delusional thinking. Delusional thinking can emerge when individuals are unable or unwilling to confront reality. For example, someone who experiences repeated setbacks might construct elaborate narratives to justify their failures, blaming external forces rather than examining their own choices. This mindset can lead to self-destructive behavior and strained relationships. This is yet another factor that parallels Eddie as well, since Eddie convinces himself that Peter is solely responsible for all his failures, even though his actions led him to his own downfall. The symbiote amplifies this delusion by feeding on Eddie's bitterness and turning it into an obsessive hatred. Number 4. The symbiote as a metaphor for amplified flaws. The symbiote in Spider-Man 3 serves as a powerful metaphor for external forces that amplify existing flaws rather than creating them. Eddie Brock is already arrogant, jealous, and bitter before he bonds with the symbiote. It doesn't introduce those traits, it magnifies them to their extremes. Once Eddie embraces the symbiote, his bitterness turns into obsessive hatred. His arrogance becomes unchecked narcissism, and his jealousy morphs into a destructive rage. The symbiote acts like a drug or a corrupting source of power, giving Eddie strength and confidence, but at the cost of his humanity. It feeds on his darkest impulses, pushing him further into self-destruction. This dynamic mirrors real-life scenarios where external influences like drugs, alcohol, or insatiable hunger for power exacerbate existing personal flaws. For example, someone under the influence of addictive substances might become more reckless, aggressive, or emotionally unstable, revealing deeper insecurities or unresolved issues. Similarly, individuals who seek power at all costs might find their ambition turning into greed and ruthlessness as they lose sight of their moral compass. Just as the Venom symbiote amplifies Eddie's worst traits, these external stressors magnify the flaws already present in a person's character. The result is often a path of self-destruction, just like Eddie's transformation into Venom. Eddie Brock's death in Spider-Man 3 is a powerful moment that symbolizes desperation and the complete loss of humanity. By the time Eddie dies, he is so consumed by hatred, jealousy, and revenge that he can no longer see the symbiote for what it is, a dangerous force that has taken over his life. When Peter uses the sound waves to separate Eddie from the symbiote, Eddie has a chance to walk away, to reclaim what's left of his humanity. But instead, he makes a desperate choice. He willingly leaps back into the symbiote's grasp, even though he knows it will kill him, whether to save it or die along with it. This decision isn't stupidity, it's a reflection of how far gone Eddie is. He is so addicted to the power and identity that the symbiote gives him that he'd rather die with it than live without it and return to being plain old Eddie Brock. Eddie's death works because it shows just how much the symbiote has consumed him, not just physically but emotionally and mentally. At this point, Eddie no longer sees himself as Eddie Brock. He only sees himself as Venom. His final act isn't driven by logic or survival. It's driven by desperation and obsession. An inability to let go of what has made him feel more alive than he was ever before. This makes his death tragic rather than foolish because it reflects how revenge and hatred can completely consume someone, leaving them with nothing but misery. It also serves as a powerful metaphor for addiction, how it can push someone to throw logic and survival out the window in desperate measures to maintain control over their life or cling to what gives them a sense of purpose. If Eddie was already delusional before bonding with the symbiote, then the symbiote only magnified those traits, making him far more dangerously unhinged. His final moments show how much the symbiote means to Eddie, how deeply it has pushed him over the edge, and how far he is willing to go for the symbiote, even at the cost of his own life. Eddie's death is not just a physical end, it's his own downfall. A man so consumed by darkness that he would rather die than forgive himself or his enemies. In a way, it's poetic. Eddie's unwillingness to let go of his hatred and obsession led to his own demise. It perfectly encapsulates one of Spider-Man 3's central themes, that revenge doesn't just destroy your enemies, it destroys you too. Despite Sam Raimi's reluctance to include Venom in Spider-Man 3, he still gave Topher Grace his time as the villain, crafting a version of Eddie Brock Venom, while imperfect, is far from bad. Grace's portrayal brought depth and humanity to a character who could have been easily reduced to a one-dimensional monster. This Eddie Brock was arrogant, bitter, and deeply flawed, a man whose personal failings made him vulnerable to the symbiote's corrupting influence. While many fans argued that Venom felt rushed and underdeveloped due to limited screen time, it's clear that Grace did everything he could with the material he was given, delivering a performance that captured the emotional and psychological menace of the character. Had Venom been saved for Spider-Man 4, there's no doubt his story could have been more fleshed out, allowing for a deeper exploration of Eddie Brock's downfall and giving Venom the spotlight he deserved. But sometimes, things just aren't meant to be. The studio's insistence on cramming multiple villains in Spider-Man 3 created an overcrowded narrative that left Venom with less room to shine. While we can't change how much screen time Grace had, we can still appreciate what was given to us. A unique take on Venom that leaned into horror elements and human flaws rather than relying solely on brute force or comic book accuracy. For me, Raimi's Venom will always be my number one out of every other version of the character. It wasn't perfect or the most comic accurate, but I would agree it was true to both 616 and Ultimate interpretations in some aspects, which is enough for me. It was bold and unique compared to any other iteration. It showed us a Venom who wasn't just a physical threat but an emotional one, a tragic figure consumed by rage, hatred, and revenge. While Raimi's design made Venom terrifying in ways that felt raw and primal, this version of Venom may not have the most screen time or the most comic accurate portrayal, but it had heart, and it fits seamlessly into the themes of the Raimi trilogy. In the end, Spider-Man 3's Venom reminds us of what makes Sam Raimi's Spider-Man films so special, their focus on humanity, flaws, and redemption. While other versions of Venom may have more spectacle or charisma, Raimi's Venom resonates because he feels real. For all its imperfections, this version of Venom holds a special place in my heart, and I always look back on it as an ambitious and memorable interpretation of one of Spider-Man's greatest foes.